The air in the Portsmouth tavern hung thick with salt, ale, and the sweat of men who had spent too long at sea. Mary Beck moved through the crowded room with a practiced ease, balancing a tray of tankards against her hip. She was not the sort of woman who drew immediate attention. Her gown was plain wool, her hair pinned beneath a simple cap, but a second glance revealed a quiet steadiness in her face, a directness in her gray eyes that made loud men lower their voices. The private parlor at the back was a different world. Through the half-open door, Mary could see the Duke of Ashworth seated at the head of a long oak table, his dark coat tailored to perfection, his cravat a crisp white against a jaw that looked carved from granite. Across from him sat a Levantan merchant named Mr. Haddad, a round man with quick eyes and a smile that never quite settled. Between them stood a thin, nervous translator named Mr. Finch, who had been hired by the merchant. Mary had served them twice already. The third time she entered to refill the wine, she heard something that made her pause. Mr. Haddad spoke in rapid, fluid Arabic. Mary, whose father had spent years charting the Mediterranean and had taught her the language alongside her letters, understood every word. "Tell him the inspection clause allows for third-party certification from Alexandria," Haddad said. Then, in a lower tone, he added, "And tell him the penalty for late delivery is £100. The document says 1,000. The translator nodded and opened his mouth. Mary set the wine bottle down with a deliberate thud. The Duke looked up, his dark eyes sharp with annoyance. Finch turned, his face paling. "Your Grace," Mary said, her voice calm but clear, "the merchant is lying to you. The penalty for late delivery is £1,000, not 100, and the inspection clause does not mention Alexandria. It requires certification from London." The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Haddad's smile vanished. Finch took a step back, his hands shaking. The Duke's gaze moved from Mary to the translator, then to the merchant. His expression did not change, but something cold settled in his eyes. "Is this true?" he asked Finch. The translator swallowed. "Your Grace, she is a tavern maid. She cannot possibly understand the nuances of trade Arabic." Mary turned to face him. The merchant said, "Tell him the penalty for late delivery is £100. The document says 1,000. That is not nuance. That is fraud." The Duke rose slowly from his chair. He was tall, taller than she had realized, and when he moved, the room seemed to shrink around him. He looked at the contract on the table, then at the merchant, who was already reaching for his hat. "I think," the Duke said, his voice low and dangerous, "you should leave before I summon the harbor authorities." The merchant and the translator fled. The door slammed behind them, and the room fell quiet. Mary stood very still. Her hands were trembling, but she pressed them flat against her apron. She had just lost her position. She was certain of it. The tavern keeper would never forgive her for disrupting a private negotiation with a duke. But the Duke did not shout. He did not even move. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, and said, "What is your name?" "Mary Beck, Your Grace." He picked up the contract, folded it, and slid it into his coat. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a gold sovereign. "This is not payment," he said, placing it on the table. "It is a debt. You have saved me from a costly mistake. I will not forget it." He walked past her, close enough that she caught the scent of clean linen and something sharper, like winter air. At the door he paused. "I will return tomorrow. I wish to speak with you further." And then he was gone, leaving Mary alone in the silent room, the gold sovereign gleaming on the table like a promise she did not yet understand. Part 2. The next morning, Mary was up before dawn, scrubbing the tavern floor. The Duke's gold sovereign was hidden in the pocket of her dress, a heavy weight against her thigh. She had told no one. The tavern keeper, Mr. Grimes, had heard a version of events from the pot, and had spent the evening muttering about interfering women and lost custom. Mary expected the Duke's return to be a formality, perhaps an offer of coin, a brief thanks. She did not expect him to arrive at 9 o'clock in the morning, immaculate in a dove-gray coat, his carriage blocking the narrow street outside. Grimes nearly fell over himself bowing. Mary was summoned to the private parlor, where the Duke stood by the window, looking out at the harbor. He did not turn when she entered. "You speak Arabic like a scholar." "My father was a cartographer for the Navy," she said. "He spent 6 years in the Mediterranean. I learned alongside him." "And you read it?" "Yes." He turned then, his gaze assessing. "I need a translator. The negotiations in London are intricate, and I no longer trust the men I have hired. You will be paid £20 a month, with lodgings provided." Mary blinked. £20 a month was more than she earned in a year. "I cannot," she said. The Duke's expression flickered, a shadow of surprise. "Why not?" "My father is unwell. He needs me here." The Duke was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I understand duty, but consider this. A woman with your skills will not remain safe here. The men you exposed last night have long memories. You have made enemies." Mary felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. She thought of her father, asleep in the small cottage behind the tavern, his hands gnarled from years of holding compasses and pens. "I will consider it," she said. The Duke nodded and placed his card on the table. "Send word to this address if you change your mind." He left without another word. Mary stared at the card, at the elegant engraving, "The Duke of Ashworth, Ashworth House, Berkeley Square." That evening she told her father everything. He listened quietly, his faded blue eyes thoughtful. "You must go," he said. "I will not leave you." "I can manage, Mary, and if these men are dangerous, you cannot stay here." Mary opened her mouth to argue, but a crash from the tavern below made her freeze. Shouts, the sound of wood splintering. She ran to the window and saw 3 men in rough coats kicking at the tavern door. She grabbed her father's arm. "We leave now, through the back." They slipped out into the cold night, Mary supporting her father's weight, their breath misting in the darkness. Behind them, the tavern door gave way with a roar. Mary did not look back. She led her father to the parish church, where the vicar, an old friend, hid them in the vestry until morning. At first light, she sent a boy to the Duke's address in London with a single line, "I accept your offer. We are in danger." The reply came within hours, not in the form of a letter but in the form of the Duke himself, riding hard at the head of a small carriage. He found them in the vestry, Mary's father pale and coughing, Mary's face streaked with dust and exhaustion. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You should have sent for me sooner." Mary lifted her chin. "I did not know if you would come." He stepped closer, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I will always come," he said. And in the dim light of the vestry, with her father's life hanging in the balance, Mary believed him. Part 3. Ashworth House was a palace of marble and gold, a fortress of wealth that made Mary feel small. She had been given a suite of rooms on the 3rd floor, near the servants' quarters but far finer than anything she had ever known. Her father was attended by the Duke's own physician, who diagnosed a lung infection and prescribed rest, warm broth, and a tincture that eased his coughing. Mary spent her first days learning the household. She met the housekeeper, a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Phelps, and the butler, Mr. Tarrow, who treated her with a careful respect that suggested he was unsure what to make of her. The Duke was absent often, attending to business in the city, but he had left instructions that Mary was to have access to his library and any maps she required. It was in the library that Lady Whitmore found her. The Duke's sister was a tall woman with the same dark eyes as her brother, but where his expression was guarded, hers was openly hostile. She stood in the doorway, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk, and looked at Mary as though she were a stain on the carpet. "So you are the Tavern Maid." Mary closed the book she had been reading and rose. "I am Mary Beck, my lady." I know what you are. You are a fortune hunter who saved my brother from a minor financial inconvenience and now expects to be kept in luxury." Mary felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice steady. "I am a translator, my lady, nothing more. I am paid for my services." Lady Whitmore's lips curled. "We shall see." She swept from the room, leaving Mary trembling with a rage she could not fully express. She had been insulted before, by drunkards and rough men, but never with such polished cruelty. That evening the Duke summoned her to his study. He was standing by the fire, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked tired, Mary thought, and younger somehow, without the armor of his formal dress. "My sister spoke to you," he said. "It was not a question." "She did." "She will not do so again. I have spoken to her." Mary shook her head. "You should not have done that. It will only make her angrier." The Duke's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "You are very practical for a woman who has been insulted." "I have been insulted before, Your Grace. It does not break me." He studied her for a long moment, and something in his gaze shifted, softened. "No, I imagine it does not." He turned back to the fire, and Mary stood there, uncertain whether to stay or leave. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It felt, somehow, like the beginning of something neither of them could name. "I have a dinner tomorrow," the Duke said finally. "Investors from the Levant Company. I would like you to attend to listen to the translators. I do not trust them." "As a servant or as a guest?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "As my advisor, you will sit at the table." Mary's heart stuttered. "The tongue will talk." "Let them." He held her gaze, and for a moment Mary saw something in his eyes that looked almost like defiance. It was the look of a man who had spent his life being told what he could and could not do, and had decided, finally, to stop listening. "Very well," she said, "I will attend." She left him standing by the fire, and when she closed the door behind her, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Part 4. The dinner was a disaster from the first course. Mary sat at the far end of the table, dressed in a plain gray gown that had been altered by the household seamstress. The other guests, wealthy men in dark coats, their wives glittering with jewels, glanced at her with curiosity and disdain. Lady Whitmore, seated near her brother, refused to acknowledge her existence. The translators were two men, one English, one Levantan. They spoke in low tones, each translating for his own party. Mary listened carefully, her hands folded in her lap. The English translator, Mr. Crane, was good, but he had a habit of softening the blunt language of commerce. When the lead investor, Lord Hartley, demanded a guarantee of 20% return, Crane translated it as a hope for reasonable profit. Mary said nothing. Then the Levantan translator spoke, and she felt her blood still. He was translating a clause about port taxes. The Arabic document specified that the company would pay a 12% tax on all goods entering British ports. The translator said 10%. Mary rose from her chair. The room fell silent. "Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and steady, "the translator is in error. The document specifies 12%, not 10. The Levantan translator paled. Crane opened his mouth to protest, but the Duke held up a hand. "Show me the document," he said. Mary walked to the head of the table, aware of every eye upon her. She took the Arabic contract, pointed to the clause, and translated it aloud, word for word. Lord Hartley leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Is this true?" The Duke nodded. "It is. I have been misled by my own translators. It will not happen again." The investors demanded the original documents and the translators were dismissed. The dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Mary returned to her seat, her heart pounding, and did not look up for the rest of the meal. The next morning, the rumors began. By noon, all of London was whispering that the Duke of Ashworth had been saved from ruin by a tavern maid, and that he had seated her at his table like a lady. The gossip was vicious, gleeful, and relentless. Lady Whitmore chose that evening to strike. A musicale was being held at the home of Lady Cowper, one of the patronesses of Almack. Mary had been invited as part of the Duke's household, but when she arrived, she was led not to the drawing room but to the servants' gallery above the stairs. Lady Whitmore's instructions, the footman said, avoiding her eyes. Mary stood in the narrow gallery, looking down at the glittering crowd below. She saw the Duke enter, saw his eyes search the room, saw him frown. She did not descend. She stood in the shadows, her back straight, her hands folded, and watched as the people who had mocked her laughed and danced and pretended she did not exist. When the Duke finally saw her, he was mid-conversation with a group of gentlemen. His face went still. Then, without a word, he excused himself and strode toward the stairs. He climbed to the gallery, his shoes loud on the wooden steps. He stopped before her, his eyes dark with fury. "Who put you here?" he asked. Mary lifted her chin. "It does not matter." "It matters to me." He did not wait for an answer. He took her hand, right there in full view of the ton, and led her down the stairs, through the crowded drawing room and out the front door. The silence behind them was deafening. Mary, her hand still held in his, felt the cold night air on her face and thought, "This is the moment. Everything changes now." She did not know how right she was. Part 5. The carriage ride back to Ashworth House was silent. The Duke sat across from Mary, his jaw tight, his hands resting on his knees. Mary did not speak. She was too aware of the warmth of his hand still lingering on her skin, too aware of the scandal that would break over London by morning. When they arrived, he ordered his sister to his study. Mary waited in her room, her father asleep in the adjoining chamber. She could hear the raised voices through the walls, though she could not make out the words. Then, suddenly, the door to her room opened. Lady Whitmore stood there, her face pale, her eyes blazing. "You have turned my brother against me," she said. "I have done nothing." "You have done everything." Lady Whitmore stepped closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "Do you think I do not know what you are? Your father was accused of espionage. He sold naval secrets to the French. He is a traitor, and you are the daughter of a traitor." Mary felt the words like a blow to the chest. She could not breathe. "That is a lie," she managed. "Is it?" Lady Whitmore smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "The family solicitor found the records this afternoon. Your father's name is in the Admiralty files. He was accused of selling maps to French agents in 1808. The case was never proven, but everyone knew." Mary's hands were shaking. She thought of her father, lying in the next room, his lungs rattling with every breath. She thought of the years of quiet poverty, the whispers that had followed them from port to port. "He is innocent," she said. "Prove it," Lady Whitmore said. She turned and left, her skirts sweeping the floor like a wave receding. Mary stood alone in the dark room, her world collapsing around her. The next morning, she packed their belongings. The Duke found her in the courtyard, helping her father into a hired carriage. His face was haggard, his cravat undone, as though he had not slept. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Leaving. I will not bring scandal to your name." "I do not care about scandal." "You should." Mary turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your sister has made it clear that my presence here is a danger to your family. I will not be the cause of your ruin." The Duke stepped forward, his hands reaching for her. "Mary, please stay. I will find the truth. I will prove your father's innocence." "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that?" He stopped, his hands falling to his sides. The question hung between them, raw and unanswerable. "Because I cannot bear to lose you," he said finally. Mary stared at him. The words were simple, unadorned, and utterly devastating. "You do not know me," she whispered. "I know enough." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "I know that you are brave and clever and proud. I know that you saved me without asking for anything in return. I know that you look at me as though I am a man and not a title, and I know that I have never met anyone like you in all my life." Mary felt her resolve crumbling. But then she thought of Lady Whitmore's words, of the whispers that would follow them wherever they went, and she steeled herself. "I cannot stay," she said. "Not until my father's name is cleared, not until I am worthy of your regard." She turned and climbed into the carriage, leaving him standing alone in the courtyard, his hands empty, his heart laid bare. The carriage pulled away, and Mary did not look back. Part 6. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Mary's life. She and her father took a small cottage in the village of Oakwood, 3 miles from the nearest town. The cottage was damp and cold, but it was clean, and Mary worked hard to make it habitable. Her father's health improved slowly, though he was still weak. Mary did not hear from the Duke. She told herself she did not expect to. But every morning she found herself watching the road, hopping for a letter, a visitor, a sign. The sign came in the form of a package, delivered by a courier in the Duke's livery. Inside was a thick bundle of documents tied with a black ribbon, and a letter. Mary unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Mary, I have found the truth. Your father was accused by a man named William Price, a cartographer who envied his position. Price forged the evidence and paid a witness to lie. The Admiralty closed the case for lack of proof, but the stain remained. I have uncovered the original forgeries, the witness's confession, and the correspondence that proves Price's guilt. I have presented these to the Admiralty. Your father's name is cleared. I do not ask you to return. I ask only that you believe me when I say this. I have thought of you every day since you left. I have walked the corridors of Ashworth House and felt your absence like a missing limb. I am not the man I was before I met you. I am learning to listen. I am learning to trust. And I am learning slowly that the only thing I want in this world is you. Yours with all my heart, Alexander." Mary read the letter 3 times, then she read it again. Her father, sitting by the fire, watched her with knowing eyes. "He loves you," he said. Mary shook her head. "He does not know what he is saying. He is a duke. I am a tavern maid." "You are Mary Beck," her father said quietly, "and that is enough." Mary did not reply. She sat by the window, the letter pressed to her chest, and watched the sun set over the fields. She did not write back, but she did not burn the letter either. She kept it, and every night she read it by candlelight, memorizing the words until they were written on her heart. Part 7. The news broke in London 3 weeks later. The Duke of Ashworth had announced his intention to marry a woman of no title, no fortune, and no family connections. The ton was scandalized. The betting books at White were filled with wagers on whether the engagement would last the week. Lady Whitmore had retreated to the family estate in Derbyshire, refusing to appear in public. Mary learned of the announcement from a newspaper brought to the cottage by the local vicar. She stared at the words, her heart pounding. The Duke of Ashworth has declared his intention to marry Miss Mary Beck, formerly of Portsmouth. The announcement has caused considerable surprise among the fashionable world. She read the article twice, then folded the newspaper and set it aside. The next morning, she took the mail coach to London. She arrived at Ashworth House in the early afternoon, her dress travel-stained, her hair escaping from its pins. The butler, Mr. Tarrow, opened the door and stared at her as though she were a ghost. "Miss Beck," he said, "the Duke is in his study." Mary walked through the familiar halls, her heart beating so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She pushed open the door to the study and stepped inside. The Duke was standing by the window, his back to her. He looked thinner, she thought, and older, as though the weeks of searching had worn him down. He turned when he heard the door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mary said, "I read the newspaper." "I meant what I said." His voice was rough, raw. "I will marry you if you will have me. I will spend my life proving that I am worthy of you." Mary walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. She stopped a few feet away. "You were arrogant and cold when I met you," she said. "You thought you knew everything. You did not listen. I know. You have changed. I have tried." She looked at him, this man who had crossed England to clear her father's name, who had stood in a ballroom and taken her hand in front of the entire ton, who had told her he could not bear to lose her. "I will marry you," she said, "but only if you promise me one thing." His eyes burned with hope. "Anything." "Promise me that you will always listen to the woman who tells you the truth, even when it is not what you want to hear." He knelt then right there on the study floor, his hands reaching for hers. "I promise, always." Mary looked down at him, this powerful man brought to his knees by nothing more than her words, and felt a surge of something that was not quite triumph, not quite love, but something in between. She pulled him to his feet. "Then rise, Your Grace," she said, "and kiss me." He did. The wedding was held 3 weeks later at a small church in Mayfair. The ton, ever fickle, had decided that the Duke's new bride was not a scandal but a sensation. They whispered that she spoke Arabic, that she had saved him from ruin, that she was the most formidable woman in London. And as Mary walked down the aisle, her hand steady on her father's arm, she met the Duke's eyes and smiled. She had come from the docks of Portsmouth to the heights of London society, and she had done it without begging, without scheming, without ever losing herself. She was Mary Beck, and she was exactly where she belonged.